To explain the design decisions behind my UI system, first I need to introduce some basic concepts about how video games work. Almost every game has some kind of main loop. This loop contains a piece of code that is executed every frame. For example, in game I'm currently working on, it's 120 frames per second. And just to make things clear, it's not the rendering FPS. Usually, you try to render the game as often as possible, depending on running device's specs. 120 FPS I gave you can be compared to online games server tick rate, so it's only game logic update frequency. The responsibility of the main loop is to update game's logic, for example, to detect collision. There could be some initialization code before this loop, like loading resources, and some cleanup code after it. Now that we know what the main loop is, I can introduce two main types of user interfaces: retained mode UI and immediate mode UI. In retained mode UI, whole interface state is built up front. In the example with the main loop, that would be the initialization part of the code. In this mode, the whole UI state is built once and kept through a whole game lifetime. When some change in UI is needed, like moving the window to the front, the state has to be edited. On the other hand, in the immediate mode UI, the state is cleared and rebuilt every frame. So in this example, there is no initialization code, and to change Windows presentation order, the order in which the windows are created has to be swapped. Both modes have their pros and cons, but I won't go into details in this video. In the past, I have created both retained and immediate mode interfaces, and this time I decided to go with immediate mode again, as it's just simpler to implement. Now let's look closer at the UI system I designed. 4 basic controls can be used: panels, text, images, and containers. Panels are simply rectangles with some color. They are useful for building simple quick UI prototypes and for debugging purposes. Text and images are self-explanatory. They can be used to put actually interesting stuff on the screen. The thing to note about the text is that it uses a custom sprite font rendering engine, which I mentioned in previous videos. The most important type of controls are containers. There are different types of containers, but for this video I will present two of them: fixed container and column container. The basic function of containers is to group controls together. This can be used to build more complex controls like button, which is a container with a panel and text control inside. Similarly, the text field, which is a work in progress right now, is also panel plus text control, but the logic is different. Fixed container, as the name suggests, has a known position and size. There always exists one fixed container which spans the whole screen. This is so-called supercontainer, in which all other controls are put into. Having this supercontainer simplifies UI logic. The column container is used when we want to place children controls in exactly that, column. This container has two modes, top to bottom and bottom to top. The biggest improvement in that regard compared to the UI system in Pumpkinman is that my previous engine supported only absolute units. So let's say I wanted to center the image inside the container. In Pumpkinman I had to manually calculate all the position based on image size and container size. Here I implemented a much more sophisticated layout system that supports both absolute pixel units and relative units. So let's say I want to center the image inside this container. I can do this as I've done it before, but it's not what I wanted. Now I can simply change X and Y unit to 0.5 and 0.5, but as you can see, this still is far from being centered. That's because giving X and Y unit will place the image pivot point in the position provided. And in this case, a pivot of the image is in the upper left corner. To properly center the image, I simply need to override the pivot by setting it to the center of the image. And now the image is properly centered. The same logic can be applied to other types of controls, even containers. Of course, some combinations are restricted. For example, you can set the image inside the growing column to have the height of this column, as the height of the column isn't known yet. I said about the growing column as it's possible to create a column with fixed height. The child controls will simply overflow this column or will be clipped if the correct flag is set. Immediate mode UI has some pitfalls, so sometimes manual adjustments have to be made. Let's say we have two columns, one growing down, second growing up. And now let's see what happens when you try to put column growing up into column growing down. Not what you would expect. This works like this because at the moment of building the UI state, the height of the column growing up is 0, so every control inside it is placed starting from this 0 point. It's an immediate mode UI, so it's not allowed to modify control placement after it was added to the state. Allowing this would result in some kind of abomination of both retained and immediate mode UI, with drawbacks of both. That said, a solution to this problem exists. Let's go back to the example from the start of the video for a while. I told you that image mode is built from scratch every frame, and that's true. What you can do is to keep each state in between empty and final. Now, to correctly place two columns inside each other before creating the second column, you take a snapshot of the current state and store it somewhere. You process the column growing up as you would normally, and when you are finished, you just check what was the height of this column after all children were added. Then you simply roll back the state of the UI to the point before this column was created, and now you create it again, but with a known size, instead of allowing it to grow. And this way everything works as it should. By no means this short introduction explains everything that's going on in this system. Some explanations were greatly simplified, but I think this helps to understand basic concepts, especially for someone not familiar with them. For example, the actual code for adding an image looks something like this. To give you an update about overall progress, currently I'm fighting with this text field control which I have shown earlier. I want it to be quite sophisticated, allowing text copying, pasting and more. Then finally I should be able to start making my sprite importer tool. That's all for now. Subscribe for more, leave a comment if you have any questions, and I will be back in 2 weeks. Have a nice day.